Welcome to part 3 of Making Feedback Work. This is an exercise.
Welcome back to the module on feedback, and we're going to do some exercises where I get to be the guinea pig. So, Michael, what exercise do you have for us on feedback?
Alrighty, this is a nice 3-part exercise. First one on receiving feedback. We've got four parts, 4 questions there. Giving feedback only has 2 questions, and then systemic feedback only has 1 question. So it gets easier as we go. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, so the receiving feedback part. First question is, think of a time when someone described you in an unfavorable way. In other words, they gave you some feedback that you didn't particularly care for. Can you got that time in your mind?
Yeah, I sure do.
Okay. Number 2, what was your unconscious automatic reaction?
Okay. Do you want me to share it, or we're going to do that at the end?
Yes. What was your number 2 is what was your unconscious automatic reaction?
Yeah, so I received some feedback. This was a couple years ago. And it still sticks with me. And the feedback was, I was too emotional.
Mm.
And I was like, and my immediate reaction was, and several curse words followed that. That was my automatic reaction. So, I'll just pause there.
Not a positive one, it sounds like. Huh?
Well, the way it was, it was delivered as as a negative piece of feedback.
Of course. Yes. So.
And it's funny because it's going back to your original thing about, it's not like what positive feedback you have, what negative feedback you have. It was simply what feedback you have, and it was negative. So going back to why people duck on annual performance reviews, and this was an annual performance review.
Interesting. If you look at it as feedback is simply information, what might have been a more useful reaction for you?
I think it would have been more useful to actually to pause and ask for data on when this was observed. Since there was several people involved in this feedback conversation, there was someone who stepped in and said, I think that's a judgment based, they said, well, they actually said something to the effect of, I think that says more about you. They said that to the person giving me the feedback. And it's a judgment on how you perceive her rather than what she actually does that's bad or not. They said it's not necessarily a bad thing to have emotions at work, but the way that he was framing it was as a negative.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what would have been more useful is to actually say, can you give me some data on that?
Yes. To be curious might have been more useful to you rather than kind of hitting back at him, which is what.
Well, I didn't actually say that out loud for the record. I kept that inside. Thank you very much.
And how well did that work?
Not too well. Yes. Obviously, I'm still thinking about it to this day.
Yes. Yes. So hence, once again, if you had chosen a different course other than maybe hitting back or other than just being silent and internalizing that stuff and maybe have just been curious, thinking that, oh, interesting, feedback always says something about the giver, not necessarily anything about the receiver. All right. Now, it's hard to do what we're talking about.
Yes.
We need support to stay that conscious. So what might you do to recruit support to remain conscious about about consciously choosing your response to what people people say to you?
How might I recruit support? I think that what I would have done differently in retrospect is I probably should have had I should have had a clearer contracting conversation with my coach who was in this conversation with me to say, can you, how, when feedback comes up, how you can support me in being more conscious. I don't know if that's where you're going.
No, sure. I thought that was great. That if you have a coach, to actually to begin to have regular conversation about how do I stay conscious in such situations, so that you wind up creating a positive feedback loop for yourself. So,
yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Let's switch to giving feedback.
I have to say, though, I just want to back up there because that brought to mind another example where I had a very difficult feedback conversation. Someone giving me feedback, which was just like off the cuff, and I was just like, and I said to them, and I was angry. I did not separate myself from my emotions. So maybe this goes back to the first person, but it was a very stressful situation. And I said to this person, well, what do you think I should do? You just given me this feedback. What should I do? And this person, I said it in not the best tone. So I should have paused and kind of gotten a little bit self-control, but this person had nothing to say back to me. I think I should have probably walked away at that point and said, we'll address this later. And I think having people interrupt me in these stressful situations and say, hey, pause and walk away would be super helpful.
Anytime there is tension, slowing the process down, taking a break, excuse me, I need to take a restroom break.
Right.
Give yourself a chance to breathe, get conscious again, figure out what you want your intentions to really be. A lot of wisdom there, Ronnie. Well done.
Yeah. And, upon reflection, that moment when I got that feedback in this very stressful situation was the reason I left the firm. Mm-hmm. It was like the beginning of the cascade of things. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I left soon afterwards because I just.
So certainly an excellent example of if leaders have an organization, have teams where feedback is not being delivered well, not being received well, that needs to change. So, because you will wind up losing people. All right.
Okay.
Let's switch over to giving feedback. Think of a recent time, if possible, when the feedback you offered someone met with resistance. They didn't want to hear it. They disagreed. Tell me when you have that situation in mind.
Okay.
So, given what we've talked about in this course, what might you do differently next time in a similar situation?
Tell
us about the first time. Yeah.
It's funny. This was another very stressful situation where there was a conference going on. It was a leadership conference. We were editing things, and there's, of course, a lot of people who had input into it. And what happened is I said, okay, well, this is what we need to change. We were under a huge time crunch, and I said, okay, this is what we need to change. And I just took charge and started changing things. And the person, again, there were multiple people in this conversation, but the person that I was working with was just like, huge. I mean, she actually ended up yelling at me and yelling at all of us to stop, to stop making changes. And I was just like, whoa, what's going on here? So it was like, I was said, these are the changes we need to make because it didn't work. And because they were originally her script, they were originally her words. And I was editing them to make them more useful. And met with incredible resistance there. I think what I would have done differently. Were you going to say something, Michael?
Well, what was her reaction?
Her reaction was just to get upset. She upset herself. Okay. She upset herself and basically yelled at me. So it was an interesting situation.
So the feedback that you were giving her was that all the things she had done were wrong, and that's what she was hearing, and that's how she got upset.
The feedback that was given to her is that the script that she had made didn't work for the leader she had made it for, and I was editing it to make it more aligned with his goals. And she knew that, but there was still an incredible amount of resistance.
So then I'm not hearing the feedback you were giving her.
The feedback was, we need to cut this out. We need to change this. We need to do this. It was an actual feedback on her language.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And that was met with resistance.
She got upset.
She upset herself, yes.
Which, thank you for the correction there.
Yeah.
And things began to get pretty difficult to work through all that. Okay, so in 2020 hindsight, given what we've been talking about in this course, how might you have done that differently, if such a situation comes up in the future?
I probably would have started the conversation with, okay, here's our goal, here's our intention, and this is going to be difficult. And let's, we're going to need to change these words substantially. So let's go ahead and make the changes, pause, and then check in with people. I think I would have built more pauses into the process.
Okay. What I'm not hearing is you building any alignment with her.
Right. The alignment would have been in that initial conversation of setting the goal on what we're trying to do here.
Right. I didn't hear you say that you would ask her, does this make sense to you? I didn't hear you building an agreement.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, I mean, I would have in the beginning said, hey, this is what we need to do. Does this make sense to you? Sorry, I didn't say that. And then as we're going along with you and say, we're going to change this. Does this make sense to you? Instead, we were just in the moment making changes because there was so much time pressure.
Asking that question is so important to be sure you have the alignment. Moving on without that question, you are simply assuming that you have the alignment when you may not. So we may be thinking that in our heads, but if it doesn't come out of our mouths, we simply have an assumption of an agreement that may not be there. Excellent example. Let's move on to our third and final part of this exercise, which is about systemic feedback. Can you tell us about a time when there was systemic feedback going on that you didn't notice and things were not working out very well? What you were doing wasn't helping. And that if you listened, and what you might have done differently if you had known about systemic feedback back then. Did that make sense?
It did make sense.
Okay.
So I think the time that I remember there being some systemic feedback was this particular project, which there was multiple team members working on it. And it was a very large, unwieldy project with different work streams. And and as a member of the sort of leadership and staffing team, we would consistently look at people's hours. And so the feedback we were seeing is that people were working extraordinary number of hours. They were, and so when we would talk to the team members and say, "Hey, what's going on? How are you managing this project?" They would say, "Oh, it's really, it's going fine. They're doing what they expect them to do." But I think if we had paid attention to the sheer number of hours that people were putting in, just that one data point in the system, that we would have totally put more resources against this. What ended up happening is that one individual ended up quitting 2 weeks before the deliverable, and I ended up having to step in as a kind of more senior team member to help the client to completion. And which during my vacation, on top of everything else, after rolling off another very extremely intense project. So I think that I think what we could have done, there's a lot of things we could have done differently, is we didn't have enough feedback systems in place. We would ask people how they're doing, and of course no one wants to say I'm struggling, and so we really needed to find other ways of getting feedback from people, whether that be anonymous or, I think part of the problem what goes on in a lot of workplaces is the ebb and flow of work. There's usually more, sometimes things get critical where there's a lot more volume in a particular time period. And so that was, I think, one of the hardest things for people to handle. And it just always ends up taking more time than you think. And unfortunately, this individual quit cold turkey, and I've never seen that before. No notice, just left. That's how frustrated he had gotten. So, it just pains me. I mean, he was an intelligent person, and it pains me that he had felt pushed to that extreme, and nobody knew.
But the systemic feedback that you finally did pay attention to, although it was kind of late, it seems.
Yes.
Was this incredible amount of overtime. That came from multiple people having to work all this overtime, which actually is systemic feedback that says there are not enough resources being put on this project.
Right.
And nobody was paying attention until it was too late.
That's correct. Or there weren't the right resources put on the project, I think is another way of putting it. Yeah. And the other, of course, piece of systemic feedback was him quitting, which actually forced us to really look at what was going on.
That wasn't systemic feedback. That was just one person. Yeah. That wasn't the whole system. So certainly the whole system had impacted him negatively enough where he just bailed out. Yeah. But so many leaders are not paying attention to those kinds of signals that are coming from significant numbers of people. Yeah.
Well, I think the other fundamental issue there, Michael, is did I really have power to change anything in that instance? Yes, I'm the leader of this team, but the workload is such, it's like, how do you push back against it? And I think that was part of what we were struggling with. Because you want to remain, it was the culture of the organization to work this number of hours to the point of failure for a lot, individual failure for a lot of people. So it was not particular to our group, which is the other thing that I've come to realize.
Certainly there are times when you cannot get a contract to make the changes that you want.
Yeah.
And there's a possibility that you could have talked to your boss, your boss's boss, other colleagues to say, folks, we have a problem that we need to do something about. And seeing if you could have gotten the support or not. Yeah. But yeah, those kinds of cultural dynamics are systemic dynamics that cause people to burn out and leave one way or another. That person you talked about and left, you eventually left.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah.
Well, great. I think I hope this was useful for people. I think I think we're coming to the conclusion of our course on feedback, and just I don't know if there's anything else you want to say. I was just going to say goodbye, Michael.
Well, we've been making the point that you need to pay attention to feedback, how you give it, how you get it, where it's coming from, that it can be very systemic. And if you don't pay attention, you are likely to go off course and not even know it. So
great. Well, thank you for those final thoughts. And join us for the next course coming up soon.
Okay. Next course is going to be a dynamite one on working with the power dynamics of human systems. Look out.
Cool.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.